Hey everyone, so I may be looking a little bit rough today, but that's because I'm tired. I wanted to jump on and just talk about a little bit. Some of you may have already received our e-newsletter where we're incorporating some Eastern astrology methods, trigrams, karmic squares, and I have an omnistic polytheistic practice, and so I approach astrology the exact same way. Depending on where an individual is at in life, depending on what they're looking for in terms of guidance from planetary influence, I may pull Uranian or medieval, midpoint trees. I may look at evolutionary harmonics. I may pull D9s in the Vedic system. Depending on the individual, what their goals are for the report, for the charting, I use a variety of systems. It's just like divination. Sometimes tarot is great, other times it's cartomancy. Maybe it's casting of lots. Maybe it's tasseography or coffee grounds. Depending on what an individual is looking for, that's where you should be like sort of selecting what works best. So I love Eastern astrology, even though the math sometimes is kind of weird. I really love doing karmic squares because for synastry, I think nothing really beats karmic squares for synastry. I also think trigrams for synastry are amazing. But, in Eastern astrology, we're looking at animal systems, elemental systems, especially for traditional medicine. Those correlate to organ systems. So a lot of Chinese practitioners are very well versed in elemental astrology or the Chinese Tibetan elemental astrology charting. So I just kind of wanted to do a quick video explaining what it is and what it isn't. And I'm going to use my cheat sheets because, boy, sleep has not been my friend since the eclipse. I'll tell you that right now. You can tell I'm a little bit, but that's okay, because I got to get shit taken care of. So, with Eastern astrology. The nice thing, number one, is I don't need the location or the time of your birth. I just need your date of birth and your person's date of birth if you're doing synastry. That's a nice difference, right? A lot of what I focus on is like the mystic tablets. So that's North Asian shamanism. That's your Mongolian, Manchurian, Korean, Eastern Siberian type astrology. The Chinese systems are a little bit more complicated. They use Lo Shu magic. The karmic squares and trigrams fit into this area. But, in China, Korea, Japan, Vietnam, Tungusic, Siberia, Southeast Asia, at least the parts that aren't Islamic, Tibet, Turkish countries are in there, Central Asia too. So, the Tibetan system is nice because it kind of, I want to say it hodgepodges, kind of like in hoodoo, both Chinese, Vedic, and Tibetan bond systems, which is neat. I think it gives us a wider lens in which to view our. So, just diving into that, we work with the lunar calendar in Eastern astrology, and the lunar calendar is very different than the solar calendar. Now, there are like these luni-solar systems where there's like this self-adjustment, but most of the, when we're talking about lunar calendars, we're talking about 30 days each month. There's 12 months in a year, there's 360 days. The new moon is on the first day of the month, the full moon is on the 15th day of the month, right? Now, you will find some system variants like Chinese New Year is the second new moon past solstice, and then Tibetan Mongolian New Year is the new moon after two full cycles. So there's going to be a little bit of a disconnect there, but use a system that works best for you. But we look at animals, the 12 animals of the zodiac. There is that old Chinese story, they're all in a race, a celestial race, and the winners of that race is how we have that whole animal affiliation and correspondence system. So if you're not familiar with that, you should Google it. It's a very interesting story. But it's a celestial race. And so when we're looking at compatibility and synastry, usually you're most compatible with 4 animals in either direction, and you're most incompatible with the one directly across from you in your chart. So kind of keep that in mind from a synastry standpoint. There's a lot more that goes into that. There's a lot of crossovers in these charts too, and there is slight incompatibility there, but it's workable incompatibility. But the worst being the one exactly across from you, right? So, again, we also in Eastern astrology, I like that we look at what are called magic days. I actually have charts on my website. So, in magic, you're supposed to work magic on soul days or life force days, right? You are supposed to steer clear of magical workings on what are called faux days. So, when you book a reading with me and we're using Eastern astrology, I actually give you a breakdown of those days so that you know what days are best for manifesting and what days you should probably just not even bother trying. So let me look at my notes here. What else do I have in here? Elemental, you know, a lot of people are familiar with the elemental charting aspect, the five elements, especially if you see a Chinese medical practitioner, because they usually specialize in elemental astrology from a Chinese lens or a Tibetan lens, because and this gets very, very complicated. You know, every 2 hours, a different animal cycles through, and each element rules for 2 years in these 10-year cycles. So it can be very complicated, but organs and, you know, physical health, physical systems, changes in our systems, those can be tracked through your elemental charting in Chinese astrology, especially Tibetan, the Tibetan form of that. So that is something that we include. We include your organ affiliations based on your elemental charting. And so moving past elements, we go into what's called karmic square horoscopes. And I'm looking at my computer as I talk to you here just so I don't lose track. And I'll put a few up on screen too. I love karmic squares. I find them to be very, very accurate. Now, karmic squares are actually based on the movement of our galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy. It is identified to patterns. Each aspect appears in each area. It corresponds to 9 different patterns, and it's like a square. I'm going to put it up on screen so you kind of have a better idea of what I'm talking about. But when you're doing synastry, and just for your own personal horoscope, you know, looking out at the current year that you're in, the pattern for that year, you know, each pattern rules for 1 year in this 9-year cycle. So it's really nice, and I find it to be very accurate to have an idea of what pattern you're currently in or what you're going into so you can kind of plan ahead. So it's beautiful for forecasting. Now, numerology involvement here, there's a lot of numerology, there's a lot of math. I'm not even gonna you know, shit can you on this. If you look at our website, actually in the listing itself, I try to break down some of the math in case you want to try it yourself. There's different types of math you do for each one of these charts and squares. So I do break it down and compartmentalize it the best that I can. So if you're somebody who likes to try things yourself, give it a go. But that takes us into trigram horoscopes. I think trigram horoscopes, again, these are beautiful forecasting tools. I find them to be very accurate. I find them to be very good for synastry charts. If you're looking at your synastry with another individual, whether it's a romantic relationship, a business partnership, in-laws, whatever the situation may be, maybe a new friend you've met. Now, it is Feng Shui based, okay? It is based on the 8 mansions, if you're familiar with that. And it is changeable, right? Because, again, we're looking at patterns. There's a lot of math involved here. And the interesting thing when you're doing math for this type of astrology, they do not recognize decimals. We're always using the remainder. That remainder is what we use to identify where you fall in the chart or in the trigram to do your horoscope, your forecasting. And again, I'm going to throw some little JPEG images up on here so that you kind of have an idea of what that looks like. But again, we're using the remainders. Now in China and Japan, these Feng Shui masters charge a ton of money for this service. And they're very, very popular. Businesses oftentimes have trigrams done for the forecasting of their business, and they use these Feng Shui masters. So it's a very interesting skill to learn. It's very helpful. It's just another tool for your toolbox in terms of, you know, planning ahead. Awareness is preparedness. So yes, awareness is preparedness. I am always talking about that. You know, it really truly is. So again, learn the math. I have some of the math written out in the listing itself on my website. If you don't want to do the math, I can do it for you. I'm offering the Eastern Astrology package. You can check that out either for yourself or if you want to add on another entity, whether, again, romantic, business partner, whatever it is. If it is a business you want me to trigram or do a karmic square on, I need the date that that business was born and able to, so I can calculate that for you. But what else did I want to talk to you guys about? Let me check my cheat sheet. I'm always checking this. There are Vedic components here. When we add in the Vedic components, you know, really that is layering, that is time frames. We're kind of, you know, again, omnistic omnistically kind of bleeding these things together to give you a more detailed view or outlook. Especially in Tibetan astrology, and the reason that you see these Vedic components in Tibetan astrology is because of that traditional medicine and treatment. There's a connection there for the correspondences through the elemental charts. So Chinese versions don't necessarily do this aspect, but, especially in the Tibetan realm, in Buddhism too, Buddhists, this is a big thing in Buddhism. Like, they teach this at their temples. It takes, I think, 4 years. It's a 4-year course almost. It's like a university. But in these countries, it's important to have a spiritual ID for medical purposes, right? So this is part of establishing your spiritual ID. It's kind of like your ID card if you were going to go to a Chinese practitioner. So check it out on our website. I threw up some fun diagrams here to kind of give you an idea of how this works. If you have questions about it, definitely shoot me a message. I'm more than happy when I have time to respond and kind of clarify anything. I learned this from the great David Shee, who I have seen multiple times at different parts in the country, Atlanta. I just seen him in Detroit. So I've learned directly from him, and I'm very happy here at Grave Intentions we're able to offer this to you. So stay magical and enjoy eclipse season.